Today, we delve into the core of security defense, understanding, classifying, and mitigating weakness using the common vulnerabilities and exposures or CVE. In CVE provides us with a standardized way to talk about the flaws in our system. A vulnerability is fundamentally a weakness. It is something that, if exploited, could lead to some unwanted consequences. More formally, it is a weakness or fault in a system or protection mechanism that exposes information to attack or damage. Vulnerability can be categorized into general vulnerabilities, which are basic weakness in software, hardware, people, and process, and information specific vulnerabilities such as unpatched operating system or unsecured wireless system. Critically, vulnerabilities are not always technical. Many are the result of poor software design or unpatched systems. However, some are purely procedural, such as writing your password on a post-it note stuck underneath your computer's keyboard. This weakness could easily be exploited by a visitor or another member of staff. The presence of vulnerability results in susceptibility to a threat or hazard, leading to a detrimental outcomes. The concept of risk only exists when you have the intersection of a threat and a vulnerability. The probability that a particular threat will exploit a particular vulnerability is the risk. Related to this is exposure. The exposure is defined as a single instance when the system is open to damage. The vulnerability can cause this exposure to potential damage from a threat. The goal of security is to reduce both vulnerability and exposure. The common vulnerabilities and exposures database is the globally recognized standard source of information for known vulnerabilities. The CVE framework arose because vendors and security analysts often identified and described the same vulnerability differently. This lack of common language made correlation nearly impossible. The primary purpose of CVE is to standardize terminology by providing a common numbering scheme for vulnerabilities. CVE is hosted by the USA National Institute of Standards and Technology. CVE provides each vulnerability with a unique number, an identifier that consists of the year the CVE number was requested and the number itself. The entry includes a brief description and reference to public reports. This framework enables interoperability among the many tools and databases that identify vulnerabilities. Expanding on CVE is CWE. which is nothing but common weakness and exposures, while CVE tracks the vulnerability instance. CWE lists the underlying weakness, the mistakes in software that contribute to the introduction of these vulnerabilities. CWE entries describe weaknesses at various levels of abstraction, from class to base and variant. The CVE system is crucial because it allows us to easily discover new vulnerabilities that need to be considered for deployment to manage the risk of exploitation. Due to the exploitation of vulnerability reports, the CVE board decided to allow numbers to have 4 or more digits. Governance involves an editorial board that determines what constitutes a vulnerability for numbering purpose. A significant source of vulnerabilities comes from programming errors and implementation flaws. Languages like C, which do not constrain pointers adequately, leave the responsibility of preventing buffer overflow vulnerabilities entirely to the program. The buffer overflow is a classic example. It exploits the programming error of not checking whether an input string is larger than the fixed size buffer allocated for it. This caused the input to overwrite adjacent memory, allowing an attacker to inject and execute their own malicious code and potentially gain control of the process. The CVE database, in fact, has over 8,000 entries of buffer overflow vulnerabilities since 1999. Vulnerabilities are not restricted to code. They can result from lapses in procedures, technology, or management. Misconfigurations are frequently exploited. A system configured to run only parts of the operating system or with a typographical error in a complex configuration file may open a vulnerability. Misconfigurations and policy violations are identified when a system clearly does not follow documented configuration requirements or internal security policy. Perhaps the most constant battle is against poor batch management. It is a fact that every software applications and operating system contains bugs. New vulnerabilities and exploits are discovered constantly, meaning that the assurance provided by a security baseline does not last beyond the first new patch. Organizations must act fast. The time taken for exploits to appear after a vulnerability is discovered is now measured in hours and days, not in weeks. A poor patching policy is a major source of a lack of security in systems, and this gap between patch release and applications is a critical vulnerability. To manage this threat, we rely on systematic detection. Vulnerability assessment determines if a system has exposed vulnerabilities. This is typically performed using automated, host, and network based scanners that look for misconfigured or unpatched components. A more aggressive method is penetration testing, sometimes called ethical hacking, which uses attackers' techniques to identify vulnerabilities. Pen tests must be carefully scoped, requiring a detailed briefing document defining the terms of engagement and what is in or out of scope for testing. Once detected, we move to remediation. The Computer Emergency Response Team, which is nothing but CERT, manages the analysis and monitoring of security intelligence for new vulnerabilities and recommends the application of fixes or patches. Remediating involves applying security patches and tightening security settings. Specifically, organizations shall remediate legitimate vulnerabilities within 30 days in accordance with an organization assessment of risk. Corrective actions must be implemented as deemed appropriate, and this must follow a defined change control procedure that specifies when and how system patches will be kept up to date. The vulnerability management is ongoing work. The security lifecycle requires constant monitoring, assessment, and updating of security baselines. The core principle remains the security depends on using controls, safeguards that mitigate the potential risk posed by vulnerabilities. The standardization offers by CVE helps security professionals prioritize and focus their efforts by understanding not just the exploit but the underlying CWE. We can move towards building more secure system for the ground up. Thank you for your time.